All right, every once in a while I do it. Maybe this is like part 3 of the 90's hip hop, R&B, what really went down, really what was really going on in the room. It's not a reaction video, but I've seen enough. It seems as though it accumulates. Every once in a while I see enough, particularly on YouTube, and it triggers me to kind of throw some info out there that maybe will set the record straight on a couple of things. Once every couple of months, this kind of thing happens where I go 90s hip hop, where I go real tracking, real recording, real beat making. From what I gather, everyone loves 90s hip hop and get creeping into the 2000s. And I think that also includes R&B. It definitely doesn't include pop and rock. That's a whole different conversation. I'm reacting to some of the things that I've seen with regards to the search for the sound of like that 90s sound, or that even the boom bap stuff or anything like that. It's kind of like a bit to unpack to try and explain to you just how many ingredients are different than what people are trying to get there by the methods that are going on right now are quite far off. I'm not saying that you need to have a large format console like an SSL or an Eve. You kind of don't. I'm not saying you have to have an MPC or an SP1200. You kind of don't. But these things wouldn't hurt. But that's part of it. I think I'll start from like the top down. Let's talk about the mix situation. This is where I see, this is a conversation that comes up a lot with people that I talk to, even this morning, about some mixing stuff. And with regards to like how things sound now as the way they sounded not too long ago, but pretty long ago. One secret ingredient, and the other secret is there are no secrets. Everyone who's looking for this like holy grail information, and in my opinion, the secret is there are no secrets. Let's just start from the top. Like I said, the mixes that you love, the tunes that you love, whether it's whoever, Nas, Jay-Z, Biggie, Q-Tip, whoever, those tracks did not magically sound great when the mix happened. The mix was literally like just another slight step in achieving the sound. What came out of the machines was first. Going to tape was another element of it. Recorded well, or at least decently, was another element. To tape, eventually to Pro Tools, but let's just stick with to tape. I think where I see like a big error in thinking right now is that the mix is the be all end all. The mix is what brings it to life, so to speak. And that couldn't be further from the truth. If you were to put up the tapes of a Jay-Z record from like 1998, you had the two 24-track tapes, and you put them up and you put them on a machine that was aligned properly by a good technician, which is key, on a good a machine that's in good condition, and you put those faders up, I think you would be shocked. It seems to me that most of you would be shocked that it would be very recognizable to being the tune that you know and love. And that the mixing, although not easy, the mixing was like another sweetening. It wasn't a massive reconstruction and surgery and resuscitation of horrible tracks. These tracks were excellent tracks. And that comes down to, if you want to go to the nitty-gritty of the beginning, the drums were different. How are they different than now? From what when I look at drum sample libraries in particular, a majority of them, let's just say that, they're all normalized. They're all completely processed and crushed. The drum samples that I was recording to tape that were coming out of an MPC 260 or an MPC 62 or a 3000 or an SP1200, they were sampled from vinyl with like a Technics the 1200 through like a Newmark mixer, nothing special, into the sampler, sampled, trimmed, maybe a little bit of tuning, maybe a little bit of filtering in the box. And then that was the sound. There was no, think about it, there was no, on the base level of like the in the box, in the machine, no one was compressing or limiting or adding harmonic distortion of any type of, some gadgetry. So in other words, like today when you have the modern MPC lifestyle, or, if you're making your beat in Logic or in FL Studio or Ableton or anything, the tendency is to start smashing the drum sounds at a very early stage. What I'm telling you is that those drums that were coming out of the MPC were not knocking. They were not limited. They were not normalized. They were not even compressed. The only compression that was coming was from like the records that they were already on, that they were sampled from. You're starting there. You're starting with a compressed kick drum coming off of vinyl from an album. So there's already a certain level of dynamic range that's been limited or calmed down a little bit. But it's nothing like today's sample libraries that are being used and bandied about. And then nothing like the tracks that guys are smashing in their DAW once it's in the DAW, or even in their MPC with all the plug-in stuff that can go on in the MPC. You're losing dynamic range there. Then when we mixed, we were mixing on consoles. Let's just say an SSL G or a J or a Neve VR. Consoles with full channel strips that have filters, EQ, a limiting section, compression, and a gating section. That's what was used on these drums that you love. Occasionally, we would insert a Pultec on a kick drum and on a snare drum, maybe. Occasionally, there would be maybe an 1176 on the snare. That's it. There was no... So think about it. There was, if you wanted to look at them as plugins, there was a high pass, low pass. There was an EQ with, I don't know, 4 bands, I guess you would say. There was compression, basic SSL compression. These were, $10,000 channel strips, because a 72-channel console back then used to cost $720,000 and change. The channel strips were quite expensive, even by today's, definitely by today's standards. So we're looking at it as if it was a plugin. So, an EQ plugin, 1. A compression plugin, 1. A gate, 1. And then maybe a Pultec for a little bit of bump on some top end. If you were finding that you were like, something wasn't cutting through just a little bit, you might want a little of that Pultec sound, which was either like, boosting at 4K or something like that, broad. And maybe if you were desperate, you would bump up 60 or 100 just for a little nudge on the kick drum. That was it. I think where things are going crazy now is that when I hear of guys using almost, and some guys are like afraid of using a channel strip, which to me doesn't make any sense, because like that is replicating a console in a lot of ways without the bussing. But anyway, we weren't doing parallel compression. We weren't doing multi-band EQ or multi-band compression. These are all the things that are like that when they're overdone and the tracks get overcooked, that's when you get into that the actual subtraction by adding all this stuff onto things. these tracks were built on quality tones, dynamic range, and balances and EQs, good performances. Everything had a purpose. There was no extra. There was no piling on 19,000 tracks and of layers of things to create something out of something that was nothing. There was limitations, because if you basically look at it, even if you were at 48 track analog, you were really at 44, 40. So you basically got 22 tracks out of each tape because of time code and a blank track on 23 to stay away from the time code. So you had 44 tracks. Never really bounced anything. Occasionally would sample a hook into the MPC or into an H3000 or something like that, and then fly it back in stereo, and then like get rid of the 6 or 8 tracks that were the hook. You just commit to the stereo. It was you had to commit to the blend. You had to do your thing a little bit. Mix. Talking about overcooking the individual tracks, talking about overcooking the samples themselves. We weren't relying on mastering being yet another, like, when that master bus gets, first of all, we didn't really mess with the master bus all that much. It was like a little compression maybe, and maybe a little EQ with a GML if you had skills. Some of us got into a couple of other things a little later on, like into the late 90s with TC Electronics Finalizers. Some of us use Fatsos by Empirical Labs, a couple of those kind of things. Some of the tone was achieved by hitting the ATR half-inch tape decks with the mix. But, we were printing to DAT also, and then we would find out, generally speaking, that unless you were at mastering and just like witnessing them load up the half-inch, they tended to dump the DAT mixes right into Sonic Solutions and go from there with their mastering. I hate to break it to you guys, but like most of the time those half-inches weren't used at a certain point. When Sonic Solutions got to a certain level, when the DAT machines were recording at 24-bit and we were using Apogee converters, the half-inch started to lose its luster. Plus, then there was the volume war started happening. I think that's going to cover it just for today's hip-hop 90s beat-making, beat recording rant. Usually I run out of steam at this point. I'll have more of these. Usually it takes about a month or two before the build up happens, and this is a semi explosion for me of it's not a rant, it's an info rant. I think you really got to be careful on what samples you're using and what you're doing to those samples. If you're overcooking the samples, like you can't go back. You can't add life to samples that are over processed. And you're fighting an uphill battle right there if you are starting from there. Create a good track with good sounds, and don't try and fool yourself or fool anyone else that like just because it's all loud that it's good, because it's not. I'll see you guys on Friday night for the stream. I guess I'm going to upload this thing. Thanks. I am not quitting. Everybody else seems to be quitting. Hopefully Teenage Engineering quits.